Hello and welcome to Graywood Gardening. It is early April in what has been a very warm spring, and as you can see, the garlic is growing fantastically, and that means it is time for me to get the mulch off of the garlic. Now, the purpose of this mulch is just to insulate the garlic bed so that it has fewer freeze-thaw cycles. We know it's going to freeze and we know it's going to thaw, we just don't want to do it too many times because that could be bad for the bulbs or even force them out of the ground. Traditionally, you would use straw to mulch your garlic beds. I use leaves that I just mowed up because it was easy and free. Alright, on today's video, we are going to do a whole bunch of work here in the veggie garden. I have peas and spinach that I should have planted a little while ago that need to get planted now. But before I do that, I have to build a trellis for those peas to vine up. And before I do any of that, I need to first fertilize these beds because I'm pretty sure almost all of these beds are going to need some extra nitrogen. I also want to check in on the seed starting layer and see what's growing right now in Graywood and how our bell pepper seedling pot trial is going. But before we do any of that, I spent most of March tapping our maple trees and boiling down maple sap to make maple syrup. So now that the syrup season is over, let's check in and see how much syrup we managed to collect. Maple syrup season is over here in Minnesota, and for us it lasted for about 3.5 weeks. So with the 9 maple trees on our property we found to tap, we were rewarded with these jars of delicious homemade maple syrup, as well as all of these jars. All told, we ended up with about 180 ounces of homemade maple syrup. And that's almost 1.5 gallons, which is certainly more than we're going to consume in a year. I thought it was particularly interesting to see how the color and flavor of the syrup changed throughout the season. The very early season syrup was a lighter color with a sweeter flavor, and as the season progressed, the syrup got darker, the flavor got a stronger maple, more robust flavor. I have to say, I am partial to the mid to late season stuff myself, but all of it is delicious. Overall, this was a huge success, and I'm definitely going to be doing this again next year. And all of this just came from the trees that were already standing out in the yard. Can't ask for more than that. Before we get to work on the trellis, which is going to be the fun project for the day, I first want to fertilize all the raised beds here in the veggie garden. Now, last year we had a big fertility problem where the plants were struggling to grow until I came in with some emergency fertilizer. And after that, I actually had samples of the garden soil and the compost that we had delivered from a local supplier sent to the U of M for testing. And it turns out that the compost barely had enough organic matter to be considered compost, and both of them were off the charts on phosphorus, very high on potassium, and the U of M recommended adding massive amounts of nitrogen to compensate. So my hunch is we're going to be just fine on phosphorus and potassium this year, and we're going to need nitrogen again. So I am going to be adding blood meal to the soil. Blood meal is a byproduct of the meat industry. It is basically granulated blood. And it kind of stinks. The nice thing about blood meal, it's a great source of nitrogen. It's a slow release fertilizer, so it'll release that nitrogen over the course of 6 to 8 weeks. But it doesn't act right away. So you want to get it in a little bit before you plant. In addition to that, there is a chance that it could burn very tender young seedlings. So you wouldn't want to put blood meal down and then immediately put seeds in the ground. But you can definitely put blood meal down and immediately put mature plants in. So you can get this at any hardware store or garden center. Application rates will be on the back. What I have is recommending that I put 1.5 cups for each one of my beds. So I'm going to spread that out across the bed, work it into the ground a little bit, and then hopefully by the time I plant out these beds, that nitrogen will be starting to release. Let's get started. You definitely do not want to be doing this on a windy day. The blood meal is almost like a powder, and even we have almost no breeze today, and even the slightest breeze, it just blows off in the distance, which also is why I think it's important to work it in. Otherwise, the wind will just blow it right off the surface of the soil. All right, well, these beds are done. I have a few more to go, and we can expect in just a week or two for the weeds to really be taken off with this fertilizer. Welcome to the Seed Starting Lair. It's still early in the seed starting season, but we already have a lot of trays going on here in the lair. So let me give you a quick tour of everything that we have planted and growing right now at the beginning of April. All right, starting over here on the original bench, we have some basil that was just seeded the other day. We have some tomatoes that are just beginning to germinate, it looks like. And some cauliflower that was just seeded. Actually, I only have 2 heating mats, so the cauliflower is not on the heat right now, so I can actually swap that and the tomatoes now that the tomatoes are germinating. Over here, I have Johnny Jump Ups, which is Viola tricolor. This is, I think, my favorite flower, and I think it should be in every garden, which works out well, because once you plant it anywhere, it will be in every garden, whether you want to or not. Here is the creeping chamomile. This is the ground cover form of chamomile. You can see these last few rows I haven't thinned yet, and they're a little out of control. And here is our salad greens, our lettuce and bok choy. I've been hardening this off for the past week, so this is definitely ready to plant outside now. So over on the new bench, in here we have parsley and some little blue stem prairie grass. This is all sweet peas, some more flowers over here. This is marigolds in status. And then we have bell peppers, more bell peppers. This tray is broccoli. We're testing 2 different varieties of spring broccoli. Here we have hot peppers and then some more bell peppers in back. And this is sweet alyssum, which will be the border plant for the cottage garden this year. And down beneath the bench in the overflow area, we have more bell peppers that we're doing the pot trial on. Actually, I think now would be a good time to check in on them. All right. So this is all of the bell peppers for our pot trial. It's everything in this tray, and then all the 3.5-inch pots right here on the end of this one. As you can see, we had really good germination across the board, and our seedlings are starting to get their first set of true leaves, which means it's time to thin them to just 1 per pot. One thing that is immediately apparent that it's a problem already is the toilet paper tubes. This is also the only place I have 2 toilet paper tubes that did not have anything germinate. And as I watered them, almost immediately, as the water soaked into the toilet paper tube, it expanded and it split apart on the seams here, and they started unraveling. This has also made it incredibly difficult to water them because, of course, the water wants to just run off. And I think because the soil on the side is exposed, they dry out much, much faster than you think they would. And that probably is contributing to why a couple of these didn't germinate. I think I can already say that I, personally, would not use toilet paper tubes in the future. I can't imagine trying to wrestle with a whole tray of these things. I am not going to throw out anything that's growing, but I don't think I'm going to try to save these ones where nothing germinated. And I'm pretty convinced at this point that nothing in the toilet paper tubes is actually going to survive to planting time, but we'll find out. So right now, let's go ahead and thin these guys. So for thinning, all we want to do, choose one, clip it off. The decision shouldn't be hard. If there is something smaller or more sickly in some way, cut that off. If they're pretty similar, just choose one at random and cut that off. The reason we're not actually pulling these out by the roots is because at this point, the seedlings have some decent roots that are all intertwined. So if you pull one out, you'll be damaging the roots of the other. Okay, so that is all of the bell peppers thinned. And by the way, these paper pots holding up really well. I'm very impressed with these. So I'm going to give everything a good watering, put them back under the lights, and we'll see how things progress. We'll probably check in on them in another 2 to 4 weeks when we start having real-sized plants.
Nutty woodpecker is pecking on the metal frame of the gate.
All right, I am going to build a trellis that is going to go from this bed and arch over into this bed. So in theory, we will actually get to use this to grow stuff in the path without sacrificing our path. And we're going to make this trellis out of cattle panels. Let me show you. This is a cattle panel. It's a little bit more than 4 feet wide, and it is 16 feet long. It's made out of 4-gauge steel, which is super, super strong, but across the length, it's also flexible enough that we'll be able to bend it into a hoop. Now, these are made to be used in like livestock feedlots to corral animals, but it's becoming increasingly popular to use them in gardens for just this use, making trellises. They're perfect for it because at 16 feet long, if you bend it in a hoop, it's tall enough that you can walk under it, especially if it's going to be raised a little like mine are. And these squares are perfectly spaced for vining crops. All right, so before we can get this in, we need some kind of supports for it. All right, step one is to put these garden posts in to secure the corners. And I'm gonna wanna bang these in so that they actually go into the ground underneath the raised bed. I'm gonna put the fence in on the inside of the post, so it's gonna be pushing out on them. So they need to be pretty strong. Just to give some indication how far in these are, here's the same size post sitting on the ground. So these are, at least a good 8-10 inches beneath the ground underneath the raised beds. Okay, next step is to get the cattle panel in place, which I'm gonna guess is a task that would be much easier accomplished with a second person, but we'll see if I can do this alone. Right. Okay, so these cattle panels are actually 50 inches wide, and the inside of my beds is a little less than 48 actually. So I think if I want this to sit in this bed, I need to cut this corner off. All right, that is beautiful. It works particularly well with my raised beds because I'm a little tall, I'm 6'2". This gives me plenty of clearance. Now I'm going to use zip ties to secure this really good to the posts. Now, if I was confident this was the permanent place and I was going to leave them here, I would probably use some sort of wire that I could twist shut instead of the zip ties, because the zip ties are plastic and they will break down over time. All right, I just put up 3 of these cattle panel trellises and it only took 30 or 40 minutes, so a little over a half hour is a pretty easy task for making such a huge impact on the garden. So 2 more things about cattle panels. Number 1, you can buy them at Tractor Supply. Unfortunately, Tractor Supply will not deliver them, which means you need to figure out how you are going to go pick up a 16-foot long cattle panel and get that home. If you have a big trailer, it's going to be really easy. I know a lot of people with pickups will actually slide them in the pickup and loop them over and ratchet the 2 ends down and drive with just this big bulbous cattle panel sticking out. That seems to work out pretty good. I don't have a pickup, so what we did is we just rented a moving truck for a couple of hours. The truck we got was 16 feet, so we could just slide them in without bending them, but if it was smaller, you could just bend them and shove them inside. The other thing is, once you do have crops vining up the cattle panel trellis, they are going to cast a shadow. So in this case, this way is east and that way is west. And this garden gets well over 12 hours of sun in the summer. So in the morning, we're going to have a shadow cast on the bed on that side. And in the afternoon, evening, we're going to get a shadow cast forward to these beds. I'm not worried about that. It's still going to be very, very bright. I'm still going to get well over 6 hours of direct sun on both beds. But because that way is south, the sun is often angled a little bit in that part of the sky, especially in the spring and fall, which means there's almost always some kind of a shadow here on the north side. So I wanted to make sure that that the north side of the trellises was going to be a path. So any shadow cast there isn't going to make a part of a bed that's permanently in shadow. All right, I think this year we're just going to test out these 3 trellises, although as we add more raised beds, we may add more trellises. But I am super excited to see what these do for making the garden look more interesting, adding height and structure, but most importantly, enabling us to grow more food. I did manage to get the peas and spinach seeds planted out in the veggie garden as well. I just didn't have the camera with me when I did it. Well, this is everything that I have for you on this video. Next time, we're going to be doing more work in the veggie garden, including planting out the lettuce, and we will finally dig out the new porch garden, get that filled in with good quality soil, because we just got the notice that Mrs. Graywood's lily bulbs have shipped, so we need a place to put those. All right. Until then, happy gardening.